If you're looking to play the Pokemon trading card game at a competitive level, League Battle decks are an awesome place to start. These are pre-constructed decks that are built with competitive play in mind. These are very strong out of the box, and with a couple of adjustments, you'll be good to go for a local tournament, the regional championships, or maybe even the world championships. Today, we're going to look at the lineup of League Battle decks, including the newest one that just got announced, Dragapult EX, and I'll provide you with the pros and cons of each ones and make some recommendations on which ones you should pick up and which ones you should avoid. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's take a look at the market for League Battle decks. Let's start things off with the Legacy League Battle decks. Now, the Pokemon trading card game is played in a mode called Standard Format, which only allows for the last 2 to 3 years worth of cards. And we're about to hit rotation where another year of cards is lopped off of the format. As such, a number of the old League Battle decks that you might see in stores are no longer eligible for Standard Format play. I would avoid those entirely. Pretty much everything on this picture here is not going to be standard legal. At the time of this recording, technically the Palkia one right here is legal. However, rotation is coming up in March and April of this year, at which point this deck will officially join this list of League Battle decks that is no longer legal for standard format play. If you don't care about playing in standard format, like you just want a good deck to play with your friends in casual or expanded play, by all means give one of these a shot. But if you are looking to play at a competitive event, whether you're playing at a store or regional championships, I would pass on these ones entirely and focus on the other 4 on this list. Now let's lock in on the decks that are standard legal. And we're going to start things off with the newest deck, Dragapult EX. This one actually isn't out yet. This just got announced and it will be released on April 25th, 2025. But we do know a lot about this deck. We've seen all of the cards in the deck list, and we can see that it's got that 4/4/4 line of Dragapult. Dragapult itself has one of the best attacks in the game in Phantom Dive, lets you hit the active really hard and then also snipe the bench. We do have a little bit of energy acceleration and draw power with Xatu, and we have Fezandipiti EX, which is just one of the best support Pokemon in the game. Overall, this deck list looks really solid. The Dragapult deck has a ton going for it. Dragapult has one of the best attacks in the game. Not only are you doing solid damage to the active and then getting a little bit of bench damage in there as well, if you play your cards right, you can set up some amazing turns where you're taking 4, maybe even 5 prizes in a single go. Fezandipiti EX is one of the best support Pokemon in the game. After one of your Pokemon gets knocked out on a previous turn, you get to draw 3 cards, giving you more opportunities to counter. And then Unfair Stamp is one of the best A-Spec cards in the game, which is also included in this set. Dragapult is a very versatile deck archetype, and you can build it in a number of different ways. So in case you wanted to go away from the Xatu line, for example, you could put Dusknoir in there. Maybe you put in Iron Thorns. Maybe you mix it with the Charizard League Battle deck, or you pair it up with Goldengo. And there might be other ways of playing Dragapult that we haven't even found yet. But Dragapult fits into a whole bunch of different decks, and if you want something that can be the foundation of many different decks, Dragapult is going to be amazing for that. Even so, it's extremely strong out of the box. I have relatively few complaints about the way that it is built. And yeah, you could roll up to a tournament and play well and possibly even win with the deck as constructed. And Dragapult EX is standard format legal until March/April of 2027. This is going to be a very big deal for a number of people, because I know there are a lot of new players in particular that want a deck that is going to be legal for the longest period of time, and Dragapult is the only one here that has an expiration date that is in 2027. Now, some of the cards here will expire in 2026, but Dragapult itself will not rotate out until 2027. And for a number of people, that's going to be enough, and you may just stop watching the video here because you're like, I just want to have the deck that lasts for 2 years instead of 1 year. I don't necessarily think it's that simple of an equation because the other decks have strengths as well, but Dragapult does have that big benefit that it's going to be legal for an extra year versus these other decks. Dragapult is amazing, but it's not necessarily for everyone. It is one of the harder League Battle decks to play. And in particular, the fact that you're only doing 200 damage to the active does make it that you're falling a little short on knocking out a lot of meta-relevant attackers in one hit. You can get around that by gusting your opponent in different ways and maneuvering your damage counters in a way to compensate for that, but that is a process that takes time to learn, and it's certainly going to take some practice, and it is harder to learn than some of the other decks on this list. Also, just the fact that this is a stage 2 deck, you have to evolve from Dreepy to Dracloak into Dragapult, does make it a little bit difficult to set up, especially relative to a fast deck like Miraidon, which has no real evolution in it. This can be a little slower to set up. One of the big drawbacks that some people might have is that this version of the deck has Xatu in it. Now, Xatu isn't necessarily bad. It's certainly not the most popular way to play Dragapult, though. However, Xatu does give you a bit of energy acceleration and draw power that the deck otherwise wouldn't have. I know there are a number of players that are like, oh, I wish it had the Dusknoir line in it, or I wish I had Iron Thorns in it. That you can still do that. It's not that hard to take out the Xatu line and then just put in a Dusknoir line. Only for another couple bucks, you could do that, no problem. I don't know what Iron Thorn sells for these days, but I don't think that's that big of an expense either. So out of the box, I think the Xatu is fine, but if you want to make those adjustments, you can do that as well. But if you're a real stickler for like, I wish it was this, then maybe that's a problem. And then the A-Spec of choice, Unfair Stamp at one point was the A-Spec of choice for Dragapult. I think that Precious Trolley and or Sparkling Crystal are probably better picks for Dragapult. However, we get Unfair Stamp here, and we will have to settle for that. I mean, getting a Sparkling Crystal or a Precious Trolley isn't that expensive either, but it is a complaint to make nonetheless. Now let's look at some competitive decks that you could use your League Battle deck as the starting point for. This Dragapult Xatu build was from Japan that got first place at a local tournament there. And we've got the Dragapult line, we've got the Xatu line. They squeeze in a Dusknoir line in there as well as a Clefairy EX as a dragon Pokemon counter of sorts, and the Badoo there for some item locking action as well. In the grand scheme of things, we don't actually have to add too many new cards from the League Battle deck to get to something like this. We even have the Unfair Stamp here as well. Should you buy the Dragapult deck? I don't necessarily want to just say yes or no, because everybody's circumstances are different. So I'm going to give some reasons for why you should buy it or why you should pass on it. I think you should buy it if you want a top tier deck out of the box. Dragapult is an awesome deck archetype, and with a couple of upgrades, you are going to have a top tier deck, especially in a post-rotation world where Dragapult is set to be one of the best decks in the game. And even out of the box, I think this thing is awesome. If you want to have a deck that can be the strong foundation for a number of different variants of Dragapult, whether you want to put a Dusknoir line in there, Iron Thorns, Charizard, whatever the case might be, this is an amazing place to get a bunch of those cards to start. And if you want a tournament legal deck that's going to last the longest, I don't necessarily think you should base your purchases on how long that deck is going to last, but I know there are a number of people for whom that is important. And if you want one that is going to last the longest, then Dragapult is pretty much your only option here, because this is going to last for 2 years versus the Charizard and the Gardevoir and the Miraidon one, which all are going to rotate in one. And then the only reason I can really think of passing on this one is if you want to play a deck with a lower difficulty. I can't admit that Dragapult is one of the harder decks to play, and even as someone who regularly plays the Pokemon TCG, even I find Dragapult a little tough to play. I think that with practice, I could get better, and I think you could get better with it as well. But if you really want to pick an easier archetype, there are some here that you could pick instead of Dragapult. But man, Dragapult is awesome and a pretty easy deck to recommend for the vast majority of people that are looking to buy a League Battle deck. Not that long ago, I was saying that the Charizard EX League Battle deck was the best League Battle deck ever made. Now, I do think that Dragapult absolutely gives it a run for its money and maybe even bests it, but Charizard is still an awesome pickup. Here's a look at the Charizard League Battle deck list. We've got solid lines for Charizard and Pidgeot. The Moltres is admittedly filler, and maybe you've got a little bit too much energy in this deck, but otherwise really solid lineup of cards. Charizard may no longer be the newest League Battle deck, but there's still a lot to like about it. It is still one of the strongest pre-constructed decks that Pokemon have ever put out, and it still holds up pretty well for the most part. Prime Catcher is still the best ace spec in the game, even if it's not necessarily the best ace spec for Charizard. Charizard, fortunately, is a deck that can work with a lot of different ace specs, so maybe you'll want to switch it out with something else, and that's totally okay. It's not the hardest deck to learn. It's certainly harder than, say, Miraidon, but if you are a newer player, you may have an easier time learning how to play Charizard over a Gardevoir or a Dragapult EX. Though if you want to play Dragapult and Charizard, you can mash them together into one deck, and that's really cool. And you can build it in other ways, including an up-and-coming Terapagos variant that is getting very popular in Japan. Charizard is still awesome, but there are a couple of cons to it. It is a strong deck, still like in the top 5 when fully upgraded, but it now has some competition in Dragapult, which, based on results we've seen from Japan, Dragapult is a little higher on the tier list than Charizard. And if you're looking for that absolute maximum strength deck, maybe Charizard isn't it anymore. Of course, it's not that simple. You have to factor in playstyle and difficulty of play, but some people just might want the absolute highest pick based on results, and maybe you just go with Dragapult because of that. I still think Charizard's awesome though, and I personally prefer to play Charizard over Dragapult, but I understand the logic of wanting to pick like the absolute best deck on paper. Yes, Prime Catcher is amazing, but it's not necessarily the best ace spec you could have put in Charizard. You could have gone with Precious Trolley, Unfair Stamp, Hero's Cape, Maximum Belt. There are a number of ace specs that could have gone here instead of Prime Catcher, but I think that's a relatively easy fix. And based on what we're seeing in post-rotation play, a lot of Charizard players are moving over to the Terapagos variant, and that one's going to take a little more work to upgrade than what you have in this box. And if you're not comfortable or not wanting to do that extra legwork to get those cards, then maybe this isn't the right deck for you. It's also worth noting that there are a couple of key cards that are often found in Charizard decks that aren't in this League Battle deck that you'll probably have to grab on your own. You'll need to grab a Fezandipiti EX, which you could also get in the Dragapult League Battle deck, and then also a couple counter catchers, Nest Balls, a Dusknoir line, Cleffa, and Professor Turo Scenario would all be really nice. All of these outside of the Fezandipiti EX you can get for a couple of bucks and aren't that big of a deal, and if you get the Dragapult deck too, you'll also get a Fezandipiti EX. And then it's worth noting here that Charizard rotates in 2026, so you're getting one more year of tournament legality with Charizard if you're picking it up now. Here's an example of a way to upgrade your Charizard League Battle deck. This is a post-rotation list from Japan that got 3rd place at a tournament over there. We've got our Charizard line, our Pidgeot line. We also squeeze in a Dusknoir line, a Cleffa, and a Fezandipiti in here, as well as a solid list of trainer cards, and definitely less energy than the League Battle deck. And here's a look at the Terapagos variant, which has the Terapagos EX, the Fan Rotom, and then all of those Knocked Owls to grab trainer cards. Now, this particular one that I took a screenshot of doesn't have the Pidgeot. There are Terapagos variants that do have Pidgeot in it, and I personally would play it with the Pidgeot, but here's an example of Charizard with the Terapagos engine giving you a little more draw power. I think there's still a lot of good reasons to buy the Charizard League Battle deck. If you want a strong and versatile deck, this is a fantastic choice. If you want a competitive deck that's a little easier to learn, this is going to be your best bet. If you want to mix it with the Dragapult League Battle deck, yeah, by all means, grab this one as well. I think the only real downsides to this one is that if you want the absolute strongest League Battle deck and you're willing to take on the extra learning curve to learn Dragapult, then maybe you want to grab Dragapult instead. And of course, it's not linear. It's not like Dragapult is definitively the best deck ever and is going to beat Charizard in every single tournament every single time. But just like in a vacuum where they sit on the tier list, I think Dragapult is probably going to sit a little higher on that tier list for the foreseeable future over Charizard, unless there's some sort of big meta shift, which absolutely could happen between now and when you see this video. And the other thing that I would note here is that you might want to pass on this League Battle deck if you are looking for something with a little more tournament legality. Again, this is going to rotate in a year, which I think is totally fine for a League Battle deck. You're getting a solid year of action acceleration. You can play this in tournaments for many months to come, potentially win tournaments. You could play the digital version on Pokemon TCG Live, of which you get a code from the deck to use in Pokemon TCG Live as well. I think that's a lot of value, but if you are very much trying to maximize your dollar per time, then maybe you would be better off with the Dragapult deck. Pokemon have been doing an amazing job with these League Battle decks of late, and once upon a time, Gardevoir was arguably the best League Battle deck they've ever made. But a year later, it's very much starting to show its age. Here's a look at the deck list, and one of the things you'll notice is that a number of cards have yellow borders on them. These are cards that are going to rotate out of standard format very soon, and it's definitely going to be a big concern for this deck because there are cards that you're going to need to change in the very near future. The selling point of this deck is Gardevoir EX. It has one of the best abilities in the entire game, allowing it to accelerate energy very fast, and you're also able to power up your attackers and do massive damage with attackers like Drifloon, where if you've got a Bravery Charm on it, Drifloon is hitting for 300 damage, and you can make that even higher with other modifiers that you add to the deck yourself. Mew EX is a nice touch as well, letting you draw some additional cards while also being a surprisingly cool attacker in very specific situations. Last year, it was pretty easy to recommend Gardevoir. This year, it's a lot tougher. It's always had the challenge of being one of the harder decks to play, and it's always had the challenge of being one of the slower decks to set up. However, actually 3 out of the 4 decks we're looking at today are Stage 2 decks and are all pretty slow to set up, so that isn't necessarily a downside. Though I will say Gardevoir and Dragapult are harder to play than Charizard and Miraidon. This one, unfortunately, is missing a number of key pieces such as Screamtail, TM Evolution, Buddy Puffin. It doesn't have an Ace Spec in there at all, which really hurts, and Monkey Dory, among a number of other cards that could go in a competitive Dragapult deck these days. The biggest downside to Gardevoir is its age. It has a number of cards that are rotating very soon, if not have already rotated by the time you watch this video. So cards like Kirlia, Ralts, Cresselia, Lumineon, Radiant Greninja, you will have to replace those cards as soon as you buy this deck, pretty much, if you want to play it in a tournament environment. And even if you do that, there are major questions about how good Gardevoir is going to be without those key pieces like a Kirlia and a Radiant Greninja. Now, based on what I've seen from Japan, Gardevoir still looks okay. It's still getting results over there, though it's not quite as strong as it once was, but I'm not sure that for new players in particular, you want to go through the hassle of trying to make this deck work and trying to modify it to make it work when you could just buy the Charizard deck or the Dragapult deck and just play those more straight up without having to worry about modifying the deck to make it work for standard format. However, if you love the archetype of Gardevoir and are willing to put in the work to make it work in the 2025-26 season, by all means go for it. Should also note here that Gardevoir itself rotates out in March/April of 2026. Here's an example of a Gardevoir list from Japan post-rotation format that got 3rd place. And we see that we're using a different Ralts here. We're using a different Kirlia that's not nearly as good as the one that comes in the League Battle deck. We also see a suite of other Pokemon that help out a lot, including Monkey Dory, Fluttermane, Screamtail, Klefki, Badoo, even teching in a Lily's Clefairy here. One of the nice touches is, though, this version actually has the Mew EX, which also comes in the League Battle deck. These days, it's a lot harder to recommend the Gardevoir League Battle deck. If you really want to take advantage of Gardevoir EX's phenomenal energy acceleration and you're willing to put together and modify the list so that it works in a post-rotation format, by all means, go for it. Or if you're not worried about tournament legality and you just want a fun and strong deck, this will suit the bill just fine too. But if you want a deck that is easy to play, this one isn't it. If you want a deck that you don't have to make any upgrades for or make many upgrades for in order to make it standard format legal, this deck isn't for you either. And if you want a deck with the longest tournament legality, Gardevoir rotates out in 2026 when Dragapult rotates out in 2027. So in that regard, it is maybe not the best pick for you if you are really factoring in that longevity. The last one we're going to look at today is Miraidon. EX. And I will admit, I love Miraidon EX as a deck. When fully upgraded, it was awesome. However, I've never really liked the League Battle Deck version of Miraidon. I thought they picked the wrong cards at the time, and it wasn't great back then, and especially now, I think the deck looks worse than ever. Here's a look at the deck list. We've got Miraidon here to set up our Lightning Pokemon. We have Regieleki to potentially act as a secondary attacker, but also boost the attacks of Miraidon and Zeraora. We've got Bibarel as a draw engine as well, and we still have that Forest Seal Stone in here as a nice touch. However, you're also noticing a lot of yellow border cards that are all rotating soon, and then Vs and VMAXs that are also rotating in the very near future, among some other weird things in this deck. While I've made it very clear that I don't like this League Battle deck, and to be clear, I love Miraidon, I just don't like the way this League Battle deck is built. Even so, of the 4 League Battle decks that are here, I think this one is by far the easiest one to learn how to play. It's also the fastest one. There's very little evolution you have to worry about here, and you can smash for big damage on the first turn of the game. And if you're just playing casually, this one is totally fine out of the box without any upgrades. Of the League Battle decks, Miraidon is the most incomplete of the bunch. You basically got the Pokemon that helps set up your bench, the Pokemon that boosts your damage, but then it came with no attackers and no proper support Pokemon. This didn't have Iron Hands in it. At the time where we were playing pre-rotation, Raikou, Raichu, not in there. Blood Moon Ursaluna, not in there. Mew EX, Squawkabilly, Pikachu, Magneton, Pheasantipity. Some of those cards came out after this League Battle deck, and you can't fault it for that, but it's just missing so many core pieces that make a Miraidon deck work that it made it really hard to recommend even at the time, and things have only gotten worse in present day. Energy acceleration is a bit inconsistent because we've only got Electric Generator to do so, and if you brick on those, then the deck completely falls apart. On top of that, it doesn't have an A-Spec card at all, when Prime Catcher or Secret Box would be really nice here, but of course those cards came out way after this League Battle deck, so you can't really fault it for that, but it does kind of suck that it's not here, especially when there are League Battle decks that do have A-Spec cards these days. There's a whole bunch of cards in this League Battle deck that are rotating very soon, or have rotated by the time you watch this video. So all of these cards on the screen, the Regieleki, Zeraora, Bidoof, all of these cards are going away. And in the grand scheme of things, none of these are particularly game-breaking outside of Forest Seal Stone, because you kind of didn't want most of this stuff in a Miraidon League Battle deck anyway. But that's a big chunk of the deck you're gonna have to replace as soon as you get it. Worse yet, Miraidon's not looking too good in the 2025-2026 season. A lot of cards that are going away that aren't in this League Battle deck, the Raikou, the Raichu, and more, we don't really have good replacements for them, and as such, Miraidon is really floundering in Japan's post-rotation format, and I think it's going to struggle in our post-rotation format as well until it gets some new cards to bring new life to it. So even if you do upgrade it, it's still probably not going to be particularly good. Here's an example of an upgraded post-rotation list from Japan. This one tries to fit in some of the missing attackers with a couple of Tapu Koko, one that has a paralysis attack, one that does damage based on the number of Pokemon on the bench. Neither of these are really fitting the bill for what Miraidon needs to do relative to the format that it's in right now. This one finished 16th place, and there just isn't that many Miraidon decks that are doing well in Japan post-rotation right now, and I really don't think it's worth getting in the Miraidon business at this point in time. The only reason I would recommend Miraidon EX at this point is if you want literally the easiest League Battle deck to play, and that's it. If that is your cutoff, then Miraidon is the way to go. But pretty much any other reason, then I would not recommend this. It is not the smoothest playing deck out of the box. You are going to have issues from time to time with Electric Generator, and there's no other way to accelerate energy. You can put that in there if you're willing to upgrade it, but this deck is going to take a ton to upgrade, and the end result is probably not going to be very good because Miraidon's competitive ceiling is much lower right now than it was before when it got third at the World Championships in 2024, because a lot of its best cards are rotating out. And if you're concerned about tournament legality period, Miraidon's rotating in 2026, which is shorter than Dragapult. If I had to rank them, I think Dragapult becomes the best deck, And I think strictly from a power level standpoint, it's a bit better than Charizard, but in terms of tournament legality, that extra year is going to be absolutely massive. And the trade-off here is that Dragapult is a harder deck to play than Charizard, so there will be people who I think are going to prefer Charizard, and I still think Charizard is awesome. The 1 year less of tournament legality does kind of stink, but I think if you're getting in now, it's still a good time to do so. You're getting a solid year of play in the standard format, and then you could use it in expanded afterwards. And you can buy the Charizard and the Dragapult League Battle decks together and mash them together into one deck if you wanted to. So I would put those as rank 1 and 2. You might personally flip-flop them around, but these are the two that I would recommend buying at this point. Gardevoir, I'm not so sure. You're going to have to make some changes before you can play it in the standard format. And while it has been seeing some success in Japan, I'm not sure it's worth going through all the trouble to try and make it work. And then last but not least, Miraidon. I just think this was a poor product from the get-go, and I would not recommend this one. And there we go. That's my updated guide on League Battle decks. I hope you find this helpful, and I hope it helps you pick the right deck or decks for you. Again, I would strongly recommend the Dragapult one and the Charizard one. I would proceed with caution on the Gardevoir one, and I personally would avoid the Miraidon one. But again, feel free to buy or not buy any of the ones that are here. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website inthirdperson.com for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.